Seit gestern ist Joe Biden nun der Präsident der Vereinigten Staaten.
Since yesterday, Joe Biden is the new president of the United States, but only a few days ago we could see how important digital media are when we looked at the attack of the Capitol in Washington. It's very important if we want to make possible the smooth transition from one president to another. It really showed how important the EU rules at this point. A warm welcome at our live stream at the permanent representation of the state of Hessen. Today we would like to talk about the Digital Service Act and Digital Markets Act. And the title is, Can the EU Tame the Tech Giants? My name is Hendrik Kafsack. I am a journalist at the FAZ. And I will be in discussion today with Christiane Canenbley, who is Deputy Head of Cabinet, Executive Vice President of the Executive Vice President Margrethe Vestager. Before we start, let me remind you that, of course, you are allowed to ask your questions via our hotline, which is 0472-030181, or you can send an email to streamline at lw-brussels.hessen.de. Before we start our discussion, I would like to give the floor to Wiesbaden and to Minister of Federal and European Affairs of the State of Hessen, Lucia Puttrich, to say some welcoming words. Dear Ms. Canenbley, dear Mr. Kafsack, dear ladies and gentlemen, I have the pleasure to welcome you from Wiesbaden, but at the permanent representation. It is again a digital version of our event, and I'm glad to announce a very interesting event. Together with my colleague, Professor Dr. Christina Sinemus, I organized this event. So, dear ladies and gentlemen, too big to care about rules and regulations. This is how EU Internal Market Commissioner Thierry Breton describes the problem the Commission wants to tackle with a comprehensive legislative package on digital services and markets. On 15th December of last year, the Commission presented two proposals for regulations, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. Both proposals are intended to make the big platforms, the well-known tech giants, more accountable, and they want to ensure fair competition. Currently, their sheer market power allows them to engage in unfair business practices or evade responsibility for illegal content all too easily. So, too big to care sums it up. That is what we want to discuss today. I warmly welcome you to a new Hessen live stream, and I'm pleased that so many of you have accepted to join the joint invitation of my colleague, Prof. Christina Sinemus, Hessen's digital minister. The European Commission wants the reconstruction after the severe pandemic crisis to be green and digital. Indeed, there's no way around the fact that we also see this crisis as an opportunity to initiate reforms and make Europe fit for the future. The digital transformation is a crucial element on this path. It is indispensable for the competitiveness of European industry. It holds opportunities for us in our professional and private lives, and it is the key to many of our challenges. For example, challenges regarding mobility, climate protection, or healthcare. Platforms are a key element of our digital world, of our life and of our business. Many think of the big players from the USA, search engines, social media or online marketplaces. We all use them, often on a daily, even hourly basis, to stay in touch with friends, to buy products, or to use digital services. But this shows the importance of the Commission's proposals from 15th December. The challenge to the legislator is very huge. We have to find balanced rules, and the Digital Services Act must provide a good balance between the protection of freedom of opinion and the protection of our consumers. Nobody wants to be censored or a kind of Ministry of Truth of the European Union. Freedom of expression applies offline and it must also be protected online, but freedom of speech does not apply without limits. We need to fight illegal content more effectively, and the responsibility of the platforms must be increased, and clear rules must be established for the moderation of online content. Dear ladies and gentlemen, the Commission's proposals regarding a Digital Services Act and a Digital Markets Act might be the most important proposals this year. Nobody should be too big to respect the rules. And our today's debate is the beginning of the discussion. During the next weeks and months, the European Parliament and the Council will have intensive talks about this topic. And there's no better place to present these both proposals and maybe to react as soon as today to these proposals. Dear ladies and gentlemen, I'm looking forward to an exciting discussion.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Puttrich. You said the timing is perfect as never before to have this discussion before this proposal enters into the heat of it all in the Council and the Parliament. Now, I have to knock at another room because I would assume that given the corona situation, the two Hessian ministers we will listen to today will be in separate rooms. Professor Dr. Sinemus, the Hessian Minister for Digital Strategy and Development. You have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. Kafsack, and I also send my greetings next door because I'm in a different room from Minister Puttrich. Unfortunately, that is necessary given the situation of a pandemic to which we have to adapt. You mentioned two initiatives, the DSA and the DMA, the Digital Services Act and the Digital Markets Act. On this, I can assure you the following. It is high time we have these proposals for regulations. Mid-December last year, the Commission could present them. Allow me to give three topics, and I want to give you a quote to start it all off. And I am very happy with that quote, because yesterday in the US, we witnessed the fulfillment of a democratic process with the inauguration of Biden. In July 2020, there was a hearing in the United States Congress taking place. In this context, a Democrat, David Civilline, said the following: "Our founders would not bow before a king, nor should we bow before the emperors of the online economy." Well, very sharp words, but this was about looking more closely at Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, and Facebook, and I think they were well chosen. Given the pandemic, we are aware how important it is to look at topics that are market position, market domination, and abuse of that. Thinking of the two proposals for regulations, I would present three statements or three theses. Hopefully, they will enrich our discussion and serve as an input. Number one, the platform economy is a model fit for future. And so far, Europe has harvested little of its advantages. We have to develop it in such a way that Europe has use of this. And second thesis, is this not just about taming the tech giants, economically speaking, or to reduce their market presence. It's about something that's far more basic. And in our Hessian Ministry for Digital Affairs, we try to act in this regard, because it's about trust in digitization, confidence in it all. We will have that only if people can use this development in their own interest. And the pandemic has helped in this regard. And third thesis, we must not just look at the tech giants. We also must be mindful of the smaller players, the startups, the SMEs, the small and medium-sized enterprises. They as well will have a huge advantage if we give a wise implementation to these two proposals. I elaborate on my three theses. The platform economy is a model for the future, and Europe has not enough harvested its advantages. Correct statement. Because platforms are the infrastructure enabling the interaction between external providers and consumers. There are well-known examples and business models, and we are aware of the following. The top 100 platforms worldwide have now a value where you cannot count the zeros going with it. January to October, their value increased by 40%, reaching $12.6 trillion. Two-thirds of these values are found in the top platforms, mostly in the US. So Europe is definitely not in the front row here. This was part of the first wave of digitization, favoring consumers, travel, shopping, etc. So two-thirds of the providers are in the US. And here we should not really be despondent. We should really look at what are our strengths now with the second wave. And Hessen is an interesting location, very strong for ICT. We have the world's fastest internet exchange, for example. There are hundreds and thousands of companies, especially SMEs, that represent this as an economic field. And 40% of Germany's mainframe centers are in Hessen. Why do I tell you this? We are well placed in order to really use the second wave with platform economy, which is B2B. Here we look at something where we have strength in Hessen as well. Financial field, Frankfurt, pharmaceuticals, chemical industry, logistics. We are strongly represented there, and we want to develop these fields in such a way that they remain competitive. And in this regard, DSA and DMA, allow me to serve you with the acronyms, must achieve two objectives. First objective, reducing the power of existing platforms. We must make certain that they change their responsibility vis-à-vis the data. And second, the business customers of such platforms, especially when they're SMEs, must see here a future. We must develop that future. That's what we want to do. Many European startups and SMEs are dependent on these platforms, so we have to be really innovative. We need growing platform economies. We must enable that in Europe to make certain that with the second wave of digitization, our region and Europe can be real players of strength. We must strengthen Europe here in this context, worldwide. Second point, trust and confidence in digitization. When I think of Europe and of quite a few countries here, then I'm aware that there are issues and concerns. So it's an important point to look at. Digitization is to be of benefit to the human being. And we want to start here an initiative to bring that over to people. And that's also part of the efforts of my ministry to shape digitization in such a way that this technology serves the people. Basic rule, what applies offline applies online. And with the two proposals for regulations, we want to tackle this need. We want to develop trust among the consumers by shaping and changing these platforms in such a way that the online platforms really are of benefit to the consumer and create confidence. One example, a consumer uses a commercial platform and purchases a product. Many of you have been there and have been doing that. But then there are faults, and the consumer wants to contact the supplier, and then he realizes the country of origin, a third country. Now, how to contact that provider? Generally speaking, the platform doesn't make it easy for you to find the contact information because the consumer purchased is in a third country. Here we want to create transparency. In other words, the information regarding the suppliers must be obvious and viable and visible for the consumer who purchased a product. This is one aspect that will do a lot in order to develop better trust in digitization. And the regulations take that up, and that's how we understand them. And now my third statement, third thesis. In our debate today, we must not just look at Amazon and Co. No, it's about more. We must be aware of those in Europe and in Germany, also in the region of Hessen, who represent markets for the future and want to get there. These are small platforms. They serve niche areas. So we need here regulations that are of a horizontal nature, that covers the entire breadth of the platform economy in order to develop new platforms that enables B2B activities. We are of the opinion that that is of great importance for us here in Europe to make it a global location. That is what our efforts also in Hessen are all about. We want to set an example to show that DSA and DMA are proposals that really give us advantages and can be implemented. So with this whole project that are DSA and DMA, we want to support SMEs in the whole context of platform economy, in the context of niche markets. And we want to think of the consumers with the appropriate communication strategies. And we want to make certain that the platforms are developed in such a way that they have heightened transparency on offer. We don't want to allow them to rule everything else. What we want to achieve is a cooperative digital system in Europe. So I'm very happy that this is a European initiative and that we can look forward to the discussion of these two proposals in the coming years.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Sinemus. Wow, if I look at my watch, it's a huge task you set here. Okay, we still have 25 minutes. If we will be able to discuss one of these topics, I would be really grateful. So now, we have a first question from Oliver Lakowski regarding the confidence. How can the EU ensure that EU citizens in particular and their data are not helplessly at the mercy of non-European tech corporations? Before I give you the floor, I would like to introduce you. Okay, you are the Deputy Head of Cabinet of Executive Vice President Margrethe Vestager. You have been working in the Commission of Jean-Claude Juncker, and before this you were working at the Cabinet of Phil Hogan. And So actually this is your field of study, and I also want to tell that you are a kind of musician. Okay, you are playing the violin, and well, as do I, but my violin is now only lying around at in my cupboard. So this was some personal information, and regarding our discussion of today, Ms. Puttrich quoted Thierry Breton in the beginning, and therefore I have to say something about Breton, Vestager, who are in charge of this digitization. So these proposals, who has written them? If we are listening to Mr. Breton, we got the impression that he has been writing these proposals. Okay, let me say it's a typical Brussels debate. And as always, when there are huge proposals like this, it's a long standing work at the European Commission before coming to the political level. Of course, the different services have been cooperating, then the different cabinets, and during the preparation of these proposals, there are different opinions regarding how to tackle different problems, different topics. It's a really complicated proposal, and Vice President Vestager made it very clear during the press conference, because she was asked the same question. She said, okay, we are two different persons, but our differences in a constructive debate lead normally to a very positive result. So both were in charge of this project, and it's a proposal of both of them. And one of them has more technological experience, the other one more knowledge regarding competition law. Okay, it's not only because I want to do some gossip. Gossip is always nice, but there are also some political implications. So Breton rather represents a typical French approach, while Vestager is rather a Danish liberal. And we had some conflicts between both of them in the past. Yeah, but regarding these proposals, both really agreed to a very wide extent. Both were working into the same direction, and the cooperation worked very well. So the important point is the following. We have now a change in the discussion we couldn't imagine 2 years ago. Since what happened at Capitol Hill, nobody asked the question whether these platforms are responsible for the content. Okay, this has been or was discussed even 2 years ago. There were questions like, why would platforms be responsible for the content they publish? So it's really a paradigm change. Okay, it's really important change, and I'm very happy that we now have these proposals and that we can enter and start this debate. And what do we want with these two proposals? We want to establish rules for the internet. We do not want to say, okay, what are correct contents, what are wrong contents. No, we want to fix fundamental rules for all of us. This is the main topic of the Digital Services Act. And we have established the comparison with the traffic rules, okay? These are rules for all of us. And now all of us have to get used to it, that a traffic light being red means that we can't go on. And the Digital Service Act can be compared. It's very technical, very comprehensive, but this is a set of rules for all those who offer digital services at a European level. These are our European rules. Then the Digital Markets Act goes one step further in saying, okay, we have core players who need some supplementary rules. Okay, so one step back, Commissioner Oettinger in the past, in charge of digitization, said that there has been a change in the Commission. Yeah? From very tech-friendly, it has become more skeptical. Okay, and it's not only the Commission. And if I remind you of copyright discussions where we already said what would be the role of the platforms, what would be the necessary rules. And I don't want to compare the DSA with the copyright. Please don't misunderstand me, but the huge difference is the following. There has really been a shift in the public opinion. Now we do agree that these platforms have a certain kind of viability. We do not say anymore these platforms exist and it's a kind of letterbox and everybody can put on these platforms what he or she wants and then it's up to the consumers to handle it. No, this has changed. Okay. If we start with the DSA, the Digital Services Act, so I will say DSA in order to avoid my tongue breaking, Capitol Hill, this really has led to a change, okay? And with the DSA, this would not have happened, as stated the Commission. But why not? If I correctly understand the DSA, it's about criminal contents and how to handle them. But if a president uses Twitter to make some invocations and the people come to Capitol Hill in order to attack the building, this is not really an illegal content. What would have been the point of attack of the DSA? This is the debate we have to make today. DSA is not a tool allowing us to define correct and wrong contents. This is not the objective of the DSA. The DSA aims at establishing rules for the platforms. And these rules are very simple. Okay. Ms. Sinemus said it during her speech. Who can I contact if I have a problem? There we need clear rules and a much more transparent implementation of the terms and conditions. So every time I download an application, I go to a platform. Every time we have to sign the conditions of use, but these conditions have to be very clear so that everybody understands what he or she is signing, that everybody understands his or her rights and obligations. Then, regarding the bigger platforms, the core players, we need more important, we need stricter rules to make clear what companies offer their products on these platforms. Okay, this would help in constructing confidence, and we would have clear structures about the handling of illegal products, illegal contents, in order to delete them. And we would have something like a trusted flaggers, so trustworthy organizations able to react in a very first way when we are confronted with illegal contents. I think that we need a clear distinction between what is illegal and what is kind of grayish. And this gray area must be defined in a very prudent, in a very clear way, also regarding the freedom of speech. We would have to work together with the platforms. The platforms must present risk assessment for very huge platforms. We would have independent external audits together with different institutions to check where risks could be minimized, where a code of conduct could be implemented to act in this topic. Okay, here you are talking about the annual audits regarding systemic risks and the use of the different algorithms that would bring the consumers to hate speech and so on, which nobody could wish, of course, since it could have a huge impact on our democratic processes, of course. And very important would be the transparency and would be information regarding why do I get some content, okay? Some publicity. If, for instance, somebody, or I get the proposition of a new contact in my social media, I would need the information as a consumer why I do get this proposal. So the user will get more transparency and would be obliged to think about, do I really want to accept this content? Because this content is due to my behavior on the internet. So this would lead to more transparency and explain how information bubbles are developed, okay? And then every user would have to decide whether he wants to be part of this bubble or not. Okay, so to come back to the Capitol Hill, the DSA would not have come consequence that Twitter would have to interdict Trump to say something on Twitter. Or to forbid somebody to speak. No, DSA would establish rules. Aim of the DSA is not to define appropriate contents. No, DSA would fix processes we want to have and we want to use to create security. And for smaller platforms and for medium systems, it would be clear how the internet would work, what would be the fundamental rights and obligations of the internet. And building on that, we could go further. One more point, within the DSA, we have also due diligence obligations regarding the size. And we do not want to put too strict rules on startups and smaller platforms. We want to allow them also to get bigger. So here we have a kind of hierarchy. Okay? Yeah.
So that would be this famous threshold of 45 million users. And you mentioned Mrs. Sinemus. The newly developing platforms have to understand what are the duties awaiting them, because we don't want to face the problem that we have a regulation tailor-made for the big names and the small ones are the ones who defray the cost of it all and suffer with it. Indeed, that is important. But if you grow, if you reach a certain size, you also grow in your responsibility. You mentioned the contents and delineating the content and responsibilities. So that leads me to the German context and the understanding of freedom of speech. So where do you draw the line? And here's a question from Christiane Seemer. Looking at this, I see that in particular with regard to the DSA. To what extent would this curtail the network, namely that some things no longer will be possible? And how do you deal with this? Let's look at illegal content. DSA itself does not define that. It's in the hands of the member states to define what is illegal content. That remains in their power. But what DSA does is the following. If there is illegal content to be flagged, then there are certain steps to be taken, certain procedures to be followed, certain duties, certain action to be taken up by the platforms, either to delete the illegal content or to remedy. And it is a European regulation, a European network. Yes, we have the German law, also similar legislation in France. They think about something like that in Austria as well. What that gives us is a patchwork of a great diversity of laws. The big platforms will find it easy to handle all that, but the smaller platforms, which are much more typical for Europe, will find that nearly impossible. If you look at each country to understand what is possible, what is not possible, and this differs from the next country, you need a team of lawyers, of expert lawyers, to help you along with your understanding and your implementation. So it's about putting some harmony into this patchwork by stating via DSA, we have here also a single market we want to maintain. And once we have DSA, I hope it will be very speedily, there will be a short transitional period, and then DSA will be the law in place. And then we have to check in German, for example, how the German law fits into it and how to position it or how to maybe amend it. That we will have to verify in detail. But very clear, the DSA, the European legislation, will be of prime significance. Thank you. What could you add here? Yeah, we could have a very long and deep discussion, but let's look at what is the first task in hand. We have to see progress with the DSA as fast as possible in order to establish European legislation. Now, thinking of illegal content, and I remain in the German context, it offers more direct means of action vis-à-vis these platforms to remind them you have to do something here to delete this content, etc., more than it has been the case so far. But what would that mean in the end from a German view? Would that be just a ban in the German context? So here in Germany, this is legal content. So here in the territory of Germany, you must not offer this. First of all, it's German legislation that applies in Germany. DSA is European legislation. It applies to the whole of the EU. And this is what we try to achieve via the DSA. And there is a very complex implementation mechanism as part of DSA. And behind that are long discussions. How can we make certain that the platforms react speedily enough and seriously enough? So we introduced the concept of the trusted flaggers, organizations that observe it and can be very quick in highlighting need for action. And that is something the national states can recognize. Then, an improved coordination between member states is an essential part of DSA. What do we observe too often? For example, in Germany, they state this has to be deleted, but the company is having its headquarters in a completely different, even member state, and that makes it already difficult. This now would mean the following. Each country will name a digital services coordinator, and that's the group to interact. So they can directly contact their colleague in the other country. So we continue with the principle of country of origin because we want to maintain our single market as we have it. So there is contact at that level. And also in the context of a board, there can be coordination, there can be exchange of best practice. And when it's about the big, really big platforms, the Commission could even get active if necessary. A concrete question. There are some countries with a little bit of problems with regard to rule of law. Poland, Hungary, just to give you a few examples. So they have the right of implementation, and they could tell a German platform, this is footage that shows and displays homosexuality. You're no longer allowed to display that. Does that apply to a Polish user in Poland no longer having access? Or would it actually affect a German user or a French user? Well, first of all, the user has the right to protest. That's a right that applies across the whole of the EU. And here we are already looking at a gray zone. What is truly illegal and what is not illegal content? So the user can raise a protest. And the various coordinators will look at that and coordinate themselves on this. If it's illegal content in one country, then that is a fact. We as a Commission would not interfere. But if there are other countries where the same content is not considered illegal, then we are looking at this gray zone where you need to negotiate. Okay, time is running away. Now, the DMA, that also has an important significance when we think of small and medium-sized companies we want to see develop in this context. We are aware that the big names have a market dominance and use it and abuse it and make certain that they elbow out anybody else. So we are here looking at competition issues as well. How do you delineate this? For example, when I think of the German legislation with regard to competition, at the German level, you love to work with abstract terms, rather. When I look at the DMA, I would say that's a list of the experiences gathered over the recent years with competition issues relating to Google, etc. I have a bit the feeling that it's rather looking backward, and you're always trying to keep abreast, and it does not really help that much. Where do you see the progress? Well, the added value of the DMA is the following. It's the part that looks at the very gatekeepers, the big organizations that function as gatekeepers for other companies as well. In other words, you might never get into a certain market without them. You might never contact a certain consumer without this gatekeeper. So they are absolutely necessary. And they can set the rules for this market. They are a private organization and they have the power to dominate an entire market even. DMA has no interest in doing away or substituting for existing competition rules. It's complementary, rather. There are some among the gatekeepers, and we establish some criteria. What about the turnover? Or to what extent are you actively acting as gatekeeper, and for what duration? Is it 1 year? Might not be a problem, but if it's 3 years and longer, we might have a problem. So, if someone is seen as defined as a gatekeeper, we will look at the practice, and we will clearly show this is admissible, this is not possible. And that needs to be updated, probably. But we are aware of the usual practices like self-references. In other words, their own products are always top of the list when someone searches for it. And we have observed similar occurrences, and it warrants our attention. And we have a clear list of what is not okay. For example, what happens with the data? As a subcontractor gathers the data, they must not be used by the gatekeeper for his own purposes, things like that. That is what we want to achieve. And I want to be clear. It is not about doing away with the big ones or to prevent the development of big companies. What we want to achieve is to have clear rules of business that allow small entrants to gain a foothold and have a development. I'm convinced that we need to make this fit for the future. Hence, in DMA, we have also a passage that tells us these are fastly moving markets, so we need an investigative tool to observe new markets are developing. New practice is being shaped here. And that is also the intention that it can be adapted to such developments. Thank you. Another question. The German side in their legislation likes more abstract wording. Would that have been helpful here instead of just being only practical? Well, that would lead us to competition issues. What we wanted to offer is a separate tool, clearly stating if you have this size, this significance, then this applies, or that applies. We have quite a breadth of tools and instruments with regard to competition rules, and they are not vanishing. They can and should be used by the member states. And their sanctions, you think they are strong enough? You hear also voices telling us Facebook to pay a fine of 5 billion, no problem for them. Yes, there's a whole bandwidth of sanctions up to the nuclear option, so to say. So the nuclear option would be the complete divestment and doing away with the company. Yes, Mr. Breton and Ms. Vestager both put their signature under this proposal. And it includes the strongest option indeed, but it's the ultima ratio, the last option to consider. We also have to understand what do we do at what moment in time. It's not just about looking right away at the last option. One has to look at the whole development leading to a certain situation. Was there an ongoing non-compliance? How was the behavior in the long run, etc.? So, though you start with fines and the same, and they can be difficult to stomach even by the big ones. No. The Frankfurter Allgemeine Frankfurter Zeitung also said that divesting, destroying them completely probably will never happen, but we will see. It's a huge topic and time is short, but a couple of questions from the Representation Office of Lower Saxony, from Mr. Klopp. Yes, we talked a lot about the American big techs, Google, Facebook, and co. But what about the Chinese big companies? The measures proposed, would they also reach those organizations representing authoritarian regimes, or is the focus solely geared towards the US? Thank you for your question from Hanover. I think I did not name a single company by name. It is about the following. It's about foundational rules in the Internet, rules for the big names, for the big gatekeepers, no matter where they're headquartered. As soon as they enter the European market with something they offer, then the DSA would apply. And that includes Chinese companies if they fulfill the criteria. It's not about the big four or the big five. That never was our guiding principle. The idea was indeed to have a set of rules for all who offer their services in Europe. And a couple of questions I want to bundle from Mr. Kurt Gessert and from Mrs. Heike Tiede. They look at the same question, thinking of Chinese projects and thinking of the elections we had in the US. And now we come to industrial policy. Shouldn't Europe try to develop its own search engines, its own platforms that reach a certain size in order to be part of the big game? Yes, in principle, yes. Certainly we do not need to start with an Airbus right away here in Brussels, but platform economy is a growing, thriving economy. We have seen that in recent months, and this was definitely facilitated even more by the pandemic. So the platform economy has been on the increase. So DSA and DMA set the context, and then there is a whole package covering other fields, because here in Europe we have some homework to do. There are many interesting startups in Europe. There are many interesting, innovative ideas in Europe. We need to support and foster technology. We need to support and foster research. And we need to do the following. And our recovery package and Next Generation EU and the resilience facility is about all that. Digitization and greening. These are the two buzzwords, the two directions we follow. It's about investing in the future. We don't want to reconstruct the economy as we had it in the past. We want to build and reconstruct an economy that is fit for the future. And there we need projects that have a certain size and a certain percentage that covers digitization issues. And that is a whole new field for a new discussion. Indeed, you are right. Thank you very much, Mrs. Canenbley, for having been part of this exchange. We could continue our discussion for an entire hour, and there were quite a few questions. Unfortunately, our time limited dealing more in detail with all your questions. Now, what did we achieve? We had important input we touched on, and Mrs. Sinemus, you should have the final words. Do you want to say something? Are you basically happy with what Mrs. Canenbley told us? And will Hessen fully support what is found in DSA and DMA? Because Ms. Canenbley said it should happen now as speedily as possible. What can you tell us? We are intent on being very actively involved. We are one of the few regions or countries with an own ministry for digital affairs, so we are well situated in getting active. DSA and DMA is indeed an important European project for us. It applies to us in Hessen and to all of us in Europe, and we want to be actively engaged here in Hessen as well as in Europe. So we will remain in contact to understand better what should be the steps forward that lead us forward. One thing is important. We need to offer examples that help with increasing trust and confidence. And the second wave of digitization must truly become a European project. And here to delineate oneself from China and the US, that we need a different development, that's not how I would put it. I would say, yes, here in Europe we can follow our own pathway also with regard to digitization, and part of that is DSA and DMA. I definitely look forward to having more discussion on how to tackle it and how to implement it. We certainly need own platforms, we need our own pathway, and we definitely need digitization that is of benefit to the human being, because that reflects one of our most important values. Thank you, Mrs. Sinemus. Next week, more live stream on offer on the 26th and on the 27th of January at 1 p.m. The first event is on the new European Bauhaus, the new house to be constructed. The new European Green Deal is behind this. And the second event deals with the Brexit, or in more concrete terms, the trade and cooperation agreement between the EU and the UK. And maybe we also look at some fish that swim around or are lost forlorn. Thank you very much.